Hi, I'm Linda Lambert, and I'm with Red Wheelbarrow Writers, and today I am interviewing Dawn. Guess what? I don't remember how to pronounce your middle name, Dawn, your maiden name.
Quile.
Quile.
Quile. Yep, Don Quile Landau.
Dawn Quile Landau, yes. And I always remember that it's a Q because my maiden name was Quinby, and I think we may have even discussed that before. Anyway,
Yeah.
she wrote a piece that I liked very much. And she is going to read from it in a few minutes. But this piece was published in Spring and All, the fourth anthology of Red Wheelbarrow Writers, which was published by Sidekick Press. I'm going to read her bio so you can get a sense of who this writer is. So here's the book.
I'm so excited to see it.
It's really a beautiful cover. We're very happy with it.
Yeah, it looks great.
And here's what it says about Dawn, which I believe she wrote. Dawn lives in Bellingham, Washington. A blogger, this is strange. It says a blog, she writes 2015 Voices of the Year, and Huffington Post 2015 must-read blogger. She's a must-read blogger. Dawn's work is featured in 3 Whatcom Writes anthologies, Cascadia Weekly, Bucket List Publications, and Tangerine Tango, Women Writers Share Slices of Life, as well as the Huffington Post from 2012-16. And it tells you where you can read her words at talesfromthemotherland.me. And I enjoyed scrolling through that. You've really have a fun ride. You cover so many diverse subjects. I'm going to encourage Dawn to read a little bit so that she will introduce all of our listeners to her piece.
Okay, thanks, Linda. This is just kind of in the middle once I've introduced my my transition into working at hospice. Each week when I arrive at hospice house, death is my bitch. My past has empowered me in this work. I will not be blindsided. I know the people I care for will die, maybe not today, but soon, regardless of whether I get attached to them or barely know them. However, I also know that I can give death a run for its money. I let families know that their loved ones are not made of paper. They can touch them and speak meaningful words in their ear before they die.
I actually had death whispered in my ear as one of the phrases I wanted to ask you about, because this piece sparkles with lines like that stick in your mind. Another one was, they accepted her ornery. You might want to explain that in a minute. And death is my bitch. It's you're just a really good writer with some scintillating phrases. And I was wondering how long it took you to put this piece together. Did it just stayed over the 10 years that you worked at that you have been working in hospice?
No. It's kind of, I always feel a little self-conscious when I talk about this process because I know it's not the same for everyone. When I say this, I don't mean it to sound overconfident, but it took me about 30 minutes. And I would say that truly any story I write may have been percolating for who knows how long, little things. I'm always observing. I'm always noticing things in life. And though I don't often write them down, they're there. And when they're really big and I really want to write them down, I send myself an email on my phone with whatever line or observation I really don't want to forget. But I think I saw the prompt for this. I've always been so impressed that Red Wheelbarrows did this every year, and I always miss it. And I saw it in time this year. I saw it in time and I put it on the calendar, and then I forgot. I saw it. I saw a reminder. I was busy. And then I was like, oh my gosh, the deadline's coming up. And
Yes.
I realized that the theme, I was surprised my piece was picked because I wasn't sure this theme really was going to resonate. But for me, it did. I just have found working at hospice so uplifting and inspiring. I didn't know if that would translate in the writing of it. So the writing was very visceral and very fast. The editing wasn't. The editing, I worked with the editor they suggested, loved working with her. She gave me thought-provoking questions. There are things that I probably, when I sent it off, knew hadn't been edited well enough. And, I thought, okay. But the story itself actually happened very quickly. And they often do. Blog posts almost always were not edited and just were like a spewing. I'm really surprised people want to read it. I'm like, okay, that was me spewing about vibrators or death or whatever I'm spewing about in the moment.
This felt nothing like a spew. It felt
Thanks.
well conceived. It felt built over months and months and possibly years, which is maybe an invisible process as you go through the doing hospice, but as you say, it was all kind of in there. And so when it needed to come out, it came out. I think it's interesting that you were worried about the theme, meeting the theme of uplift, because if you really think about the William Carlos Williams poem, most of it is very negative.
Yes.
Until the very end, when he's talking about spring coming. And that's why I liked your piece, is because it went through this whole roiling aspects of death and emotion and being with people. And yet at the end, it was very possible. And that positivism was also in your title, and then using the word embracing.
Thank you. I think that maybe the poem itself is what kind of nudged me to go ahead and submit something. Because when I read the theme, I thought, I don't know that sparked something right off for me.
Yeah.
I just wasn't sure. I didn't have anything that came to me right away. But when I read the poem, I kind of thought, well, hospice is uplifting to me, and maybe I'll write this piece and see, I mean, it got me writing. I submitted something and I felt good about that. And I felt like if it wasn't chosen, then I would feel good that I did it. So for me, that was kind of done and, one and done. And I was happy about that. And happier when they chose it, that was really exciting.
Yes, well, this is the first year that has really been through a juried process. Not everything was accepted. Most things were tinkered with a little bit and edited. I was not part of the editorial board this year, but I know the editors that they chose were really good editors, and they wanted to make sure that this was a good product. And I think it's the best thing that was done. I think that the anthology, The Uncommon Silence, was excellent too, but I think this one's even better. It has the variety of poetry and nonfiction and all kinds of.
I can't wait to read it. And I loved working with my editor. I do not love working with editors. When I was at Huffington Post, I had an editor, and at Cascadia Weekly, I had an editor. Oh, hated that one. But I don't love it because, I think all writers, we get a little protective of our babies. And I always find that hard, but I found Jean really wonderful and embracing and gentle in her suggestions, but nudging and pushing nonetheless. And I loved it.
Well, I really think that's what an editor does. Sometimes they have to seem a little mean-spirited.
Yep.
But I've written a novel. I wrote a novel with a friend a long time ago, and I decided it needed to see daylight, and I'm going to probably self-publish it. And I had someone go through it, and oh my gosh, she cut so many of my darlings. It was devastating.
Yes, it's
and
awful.
Most of the cuts were things that I had a little niggling sense when I reviewed it that probably needed to go. So I
think that's true often. And the irony of me having problems with editors is I am much more an editor than a writer these days. I mean, I am constantly editing something.
What are you editing?
Now sorry?
What are you editing?
Well, I'm in my 17th year of tutoring high school seniors on their college essays. And so right now I'm in the interview process. I interview in the spring and choose them by summer. But starting September through January, I am editing every day for hours. And right now I'm currently editing for the Cascadia International Women's Film Festival, so which
Really?
starts today. Yeah, it starts today.
Oh,
So I'm done editing as of today, I hope. I keep finding things, but I told them last night, I said, let's just accept it as good, and unless there's a horrible typo, it's done. Yeah, and that was a really hard one because I was asked to edit every single one of the directors' bios.
oh
And
my.
I find that very personal, people's bios are so personal. But we had, we needed 225 words and we were getting 800, so it
Oh,
was
that's,
really,
we always want to say more about ourselves than
it was
we.
more about writing than editing. I felt like I was
Yeah.
rewriting them, but yeah, so I do a lot of editing, and I think it does help my own writing, but I'm not I get how it's hard, and it's true, we do come off mean sometimes. I always tell my students, you're going to fall in love with me initially, and then you're going to hate me because I'm going to be really brutal. And it's going to be very hard.
It's brutality with a cause, and maybe we need to choose another word besides
Yes.
brutality. It's
Yeah.
rigorous love or some.
Yeah.
How
Well,
do,
I find teenagers respond to brutality. Like, it puts a little bit of fear in them, so they take it seriously, and then they take my edit seriously, and so far it's worked.
so how did that work with your kids? Did you learn that from raising your children?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I started with my daughter, and then a bunch of her friends heard I was doing this and
Oh,
asked me to do theirs. And, it was very informal. But I'd done a lot of writing in my life, and I felt qualified. When I think back what I was helping them with then versus what I put out now with them, it's very, very different. But then, then her brother was 2 years later, and her youngest brother was a few years after that. I worked with him the least. He really did his own thing, but I did read his final essay and help him with that. And then I just started, by then people were asking me. And so for years I did it for free. And then I started charging several years ago because I felt that there needed to be some accountability.
excellent.
That both the students and their parents needed to feel accountable. And so now, and then, Huffington Post. So while I was writing for Huffington Post, I started getting people I'd never heard of who just read my work and would write to me and say, by any chance, do you do this? This is before the
Oh,
big scandal. So I was like, oh, interesting, working with people I don't know. And before Zoom, so it would just be
yes.
on the phone. Um, and then it really took off from there. And now I rarely have students here in Bellingham. I have one or two a year in Bellingham and 5 in other states. So,
Well, do you basically enjoy that? And an auxiliary question would be, how does that dovetail with your own writing that you want to do?
oh, dovetail. Oh gosh. Okay. I love doing it. I feel like it's a really great balance for my work at hospice. So I work at hospice
Mhm.
and I work here. I work at two ends of the spectrum of diving off in life, you know, diving off in the beginning and diving off at the end. And
Yeah,
I love that. I love
sure.
both of them. Um, it keeps me from my own writing, but I'm my own worst enemy. I'm the one thing in the way of my writing, and I know that. So for right now, I feel like at least I'm doing someone else a favor while I get in my own way.
Well, you are. And what things do you have niggling around in your head that you want to write about?
Oh, so many. I think I've just gotten frustrated with the whole publishing process, and I don't know if you feel this way about
Oh,
your
sure.
project, but I went to the Pacific Northwest Writers Conference, and 2 years out of the 4 I went, I got the most asks for my novel, and I submitted it, and then you hear nothing. You don't even hear I got it, and
Yes. Yes.
you're told not to follow up. You're told not to bother them. And
That's
then,
right.
after a year or 9 months, you do. And then they say, oh, I'm so sorry. Remind me, can you send it again? And I know this is controversial. And I mean, like, look, I feel like I get great feedback on my writing, but I also feel like I'm 60 years old. I just turned 60. And I don't feel like publishers see us, women often, but definitely not 60 year old women who want to publish something. They don't recognize that we have things. And I do. I have I would say it's as close to finished without a real editor looking at it and saying, and I say real, I have a really great writing group with fabulous editors. So I feel like it's
Ah,
very highly edited. But
yeah.
I mean a publisher, I guess, looking at it. I have a really good memoir that I would really like to see out there. And then I have several stories that are, kind of worked out. And those are always writing themselves in my head. And so when I say that I sit down and do it in 30 minutes, I can do the NaNoWriMo every year and meet that number because it just pours out. Doesn't mean
Wow.
it's finished, Um, but then I feel like, what's the point? It's so frustrating. I love the writing, but I don't love writing into a vacuum. Um, I like to be read. I
Yes.
forget where I heard this just yesterday. It might have been, I was listening to the book by Bono. Yeah, it was Bono in his new book, Surrender. It's such a beautiful book. And he just said that performers, artists rarely create just to create. Like they do, but they want it to be shared. They want to share something. And so when my blog was active and when I was writing for Huffington Post, that was enough. I
Mhm.
had a lot of readers and I loved their questions and feedback. But writing a novel that just sits on my computer, even if I think it's good, I don't know. It gets frustrating to try and push it. And I haven't decided whether I want to self-publish. So I find that the projects just are sitting there.
The question, the ideas that you just expressed are exactly the ones that I am turning around in my mind, because I have reams of things that I have written, files and files of them.
Yep.
And yet I either don't get them sent out or they sit somewhere for 9 months and I don't
Yep.
hear. And it's very frustrating. Plus, I think there are a lot of writers who are getting recognized now. Younger writers, people of color, and so forth and so on. And that probably sounds racist, but that's the emphasis now in many of the publications that I would be submitting to.
Well, I mean, look, it's racist that wasn't happening all along, right? So I mean,
Yes,
it's not racist, but it's frustrating because it's
yes.
coming at a time. I mean, like, well, any time that it came at, there's all these voices,
Mhm.
and there's only so many that publishers are going to pick. And I think right now they are justifiably and for the right reasons looking at voices that have been marginalized and ignored. But as a woman who's aging rapidly some days, it's very frustrating. I feel like I'm working towards it. I do most things in my head for a long time before I actually do them, So I feel like I'm working on building my office so that I can really get this out there. And then maybe I'll push it, maybe I'll self-publish the novel. It kind of, I think writers are never done editing. So, every time I think it's done, I think of some
Oh,
new twist or some new, oh gosh, this would be beautiful in chapter 10. Oh my gosh, I should,
yes.
work this in. And so, yeah, I have a million emails to myself about the novel.
And I love that. I love the editing and the revising process.
Yep.
When I just come up with one little word that needs to be different, or a verb,
Yes.
or rearranging one paragraph somewhere else, I get excited by that process, but it's endless and it's never.
I heard Toni Morrison once say that she got up every morning at 5:30, which is never going to be me, but that's great.
Yeah.
But she said that every single word mattered to her. Like every and that she placed, every the, and every extraordinary. That's not a quote right there, but like she said it more beautifully. But she said that every single word mattered. And I think that it is true that when you read a passage over and you go, oh, I know the perfect word that would have been better, and you fix
Yes.
that, it feels so good. But sometimes it's just the pronouns you change, or the ands, the buts, the yours, and
Yeah.
that can go on forever. The piece could never be done.
I think that one reason we have gotten such, or that Spring and All is composed of really some very high quality work. And I certainly name yours as one of
Oh,
those
thank
high
you.
quality
Thanks.
pieces. And is that people are frustrated, and this is a place where good things can be published, and, who knows what will be the outgrowth. But I think that Sidekick Press and all of us who are a part of Red Wheelbarrow Writers should be proud of this publication, because each of the authors put in what they needed. It wasn't just, oh, I'm going to get this published in some local publication. They really did their best. I just have felt that. And one cool thing about interviewing some of you who have contributed is finding out the different ways your stories come about. For example, I have never met anyone in these conversations who has said, oh, about 30 minutes.
Well, I told you, it's a little embarrassing because I do feel I should be spending more time on some of these pieces. But I think for me, they write themselves in the, like, okay, so 30 minutes of typing. I wasn't working on this piece for months or years, but I was at hospice for 10 years. So I had observations. But once I pick a theme, like with Whatcom Writes this year, I hear the theme, a story pops into my head pretty quickly. It's the same process with working with my students too. I read their prompts and I know almost instantly which one they need to go with. And then it begins to kind of play in my head. What phrases sound right? What do I want to say? So that when I sit down, it really does flow out. And that's a first draft,
Yes.
And if I've waited till, 11:30 p.m. on the deadline day, then it may be the first draft that goes. But usually I try and at least edit it at least once or twice,
Sure. Well, I'm very familiar with this process because I am married to a woman who writes in a way similar to you. I don't think she'd ever say it comes out in 30 minutes, but it begins in her head. She jots a little note. She goes down to Swanage Park and writes a few lines. And by the time she actually sits down to write, it's there and it emerges.
Right.
And
I think she and I talked about that once. Yeah, it's very spontaneous for me, and they're often written very quickly. My blog posts always were very, very fast. Some of them, there's one in there, I think it's called 4:22 a.m. or something. It's the morning my mother died at hospice. And I came home, I drove home, I had been there for 4 days. I hadn't changed my clothes. I just came home. I had just washed her body and said goodbye. And I stopped in my driveway. The sun was not even up yet because it was winter. And I wrote it outside my garage before I opened the garage door, and just hit send. And when I reread it, there's nothing I would really change from that. I mean, would I change it as a writer? Yes. But as a daughter, no. It's exactly what I was feeling in that moment. It's very raw. It's what it was meant to be. And, obviously, if I'm submitting to something like this project, I want it to be better. And I think Jean and I, there weren't major changes. The edits were fairly small, but she did make me think. And then I ended up changing things she didn't even suggest I change,
Because you had another pass at it.
Yeah, I looked at it again and thought, oh, I see why this didn't come off as well as it could, or, oh, this could be stronger. Also, I was trying to keep the words exactly at the number they were supposed to be. And she said, you can go a little bit more if you need to explain that a little more. So that was helpful. And then I edited out the extra ones anyway. So, it was a good process. But I think that when I say 30 minutes to an hour for most of my blog posts is pretty much what they were. And often a story is that for me, if it's not, many, many pages.
I encourage everyone to read Embracing the End, because I think it's a beautiful piece.
Thank you.
It's well thought out. It has many insights. It has really arcs within it. And it is not fluffy. It's a very serious piece. And yet it follows the theme. And I think that's covered in one of the last lines. I think it may be the last line, which is, I feel uplifted in viewing life more fully, more beautifully, as a result of working with hospice. Thanks. So I'm very glad that you wrote it, that you've lived it, that you've shared your impressions. And I think it gives the experience of hospice and death a depth that readers will benefit from. And I have really enjoyed talking with you.
Well, I've enjoyed talking to you, and I really appreciate your feedback.
Um,
Can't wait to see the book and read all the other stories.
it's coming.
I can't wait.
And perhaps I will see you at the launch and around town somewhere.
I'm going to be away for the launch, but unfortunately, I really was sorry to hear that, but I'll be away for several weeks, so I'll miss that. But I hope to see you around town. That would be great.
I hope so too. Thanks a lot for this time.
Hey, thanks, Linda.
Bye.